Hello, everyone, and welcome to From Survivor to Thriver, episode 40. This is Mark Fernandez, joining from my usual sofa spot on one side of Brush Creek. My sometimes tropical co-host is much further away right now. I'll be joining him. I'm flying there tomorrow. Pretty excited. And when our watchers see the screen behind him, you'll see that he is from his usually not so, but now disclosed tropical destination. Eric, how are we today?
Sounds amazing. But before you get on that plane, we are going to continue doing what I'm thinking now is shattering mental health stigmas one conversation at a time. And to kick off today's conversation, joining us today is Wayne Shipman. Living outdoors as a homeless man in 2005 was a far cry from being a proud father and patriotic army soldier. There's my Massachusetts accent, right? In the 1990s, while coping with bipolar and borderline personality disorders almost resulted in suicide. A last chance decision to face the realities of homelessness, divorce, bad parenting, major drug use, and the underlying effects of such mental health crises led to a path of total sobriety and an end to life on the streets. His desire to win back lost relationships and repair lost opportunities from the past has led him on a journey of overcoming and growth that is intriguing due to the unusual experiences he has encountered. Most of his struggles with major mental health issues were similar to most common elements of coping that average people encounter but do not understand. These days, he is in the progress of writing a nonfiction book about his collective experiences of homelessness, drugs, major episodes of anger-related problems, and the practical methods he has learned in turning it all around. He is happily remarried, recently purchased a brick home with 3 acres of land, and is a semi-truck driver traveling the long and winding roads of America on his journey of recovery. Let's welcome in Wayne. Good afternoon, good evening. Wayne, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing really great, man. I'm doing really great today.
I'm glad to hear that, Wayne.
And we're really excited to have you on. You and I know have had a chance to speak before I flew away to a more tropical environment, and the three of us got to speak a little bit earlier today. And we're really excited to have you on. And as we talked about, it's not only are we looking at shattering mental health stigmas, but really shattering stigmas all around. And this, it's such an important conversation when we start to look at the intersection of mental illness and mental health issues and other issues that exist in society, such as homelessness. And so thank you for being a guest with us today, Wayne.
You know, I hadn't really thought about it. While you said that, for the very first time, the thought occurred to me, don't we live kind of at an intersection of stigmas, especially in America? You trade one stigma for another until you actually kind of go off on your own and find yourself and find your own truth and decide like you're not going to live by the stigmas, you have to live by your own truth.
Well, that's a great place to start. And easier said than done, right, Wayne? You know that probably as well, if not better than anyone. And I guess, feel free to kind of pick whatever point you want. But for me, especially listening to all the different layers of your story, I want to know, when did you first realize that, your brain was different, whether it was chemical or, your personality, things that were going on? When did you first realize that you kind of processed the world differently and that it may not sort of behoove you to continue that way long term?
Wow. Nothing like a penetrating question to open it up, right? Well, I mean, when you come to that realization, you've already been in it for a while, I would think. For every person that I've met that has any kind of like real deal serious mental health problems, which is very different than just kind of passing mood swings. I mean, like, younger days when your girlfriend breaks up with you, you think it's a trauma. It's not a trauma. You're having some depression and stuff, but the next time you meet a girl, you're off and running and you just kind of forget about the depression. You get through it. But with me, the bipolar especially, and kind of the limited working knowledge I know about borderline, it's for real. And from the time that I was a very young teenager, which we can kind of get into that a little bit, I knew that I just didn't fit in, but in a different way than most teenagers struggle with. I was pretty consumed with like hatred in certain ways, real hatred. And I didn't kind of realize that until maybe my 15, 16 years old. But the real big wake up call for me, honestly, was when I got news from the girlfriend I had at the time in 1987 that she was pregnant. And I was able to just kind of mask what was going on with me by partying a lot. I was in the Army at that time, and 19 years old, pocket full of money and a free apartment to live in, and I was out partying a lot. And so when I found out she got pregnant, it was the very first real wake-up call for me that sounded kind of in a different language. It was like, okay, now it's time to really wake up. Now it's time to really step up. And the more that I tried doing that through traditional kind of just mind shift, didn't work. And actually my anxiety and my overwhelm got kind of kicked in like I wasn't experiencing before, because this is something I couldn't change. This is also something I couldn't walk away from. Somehow I at least had that kind of internal moral integrity that I couldn't walk away from it. And so later, what turned into really realizing that my brain had some kind of different thing that mind thinking wasn't going to fix, I got deeply religious. And I started going to this church, and I started really just trying to, I wasn't really trying to find God. I was trying to find me. And I needed a place to let go of all this stuff. And just church seemed like the natural answer, of course. Well, kind of 2 years into that, and it wasn't working. And I mean, as deeply religious as you could be without shaving your head and having tambourine, I was being that religious guy. I wanted to be a Christian, My anger, my bipolar, and the things that was later on helped me, diagnosed as real depression and real bipolar depression and real stuff. I learned that that's just literally how my brain works. It filters everything that I see and experience through the bipolar filter. And that's when I knew that this is going to be a long uphill road.
Wayne, that's so beautifully said. And it's unfortunately all too common. Eric has shared that he really began to realize his situation and his issues kind of late adolescence, early teenage years. I made my first foray into being in therapy when I was 7, because my parents recognized, self-destructive and anger behaviors that they didn't understand. And so looking back, right, it's easy to sort of point out those things. What I do wonder is, hearing you talk about, and you said it so beautifully, and I'm gonna say it wrong, but you said, I didn't go there to find God. I went there to find me. And
yeah.
Where did those sort of intersect, where finding you ended up finding out that you had this borderline personality situation and you were bipolar? How did you then realize, like, by finding you, that there was actually more to it than that? You weren't just going to discover who you were and things were going to be better. You actually had to find a treatment plan and kind of sort yourself out in a way.
Well, that would be like hitting the fast forward button, because that was 1987 when the realization came to me.
Yep.
But it was 2008 when I was actually in a place where not only did I know where to go try to find psychiatric help, but my homeless experiences, my rock bottom was that process of kind of like when you're put into the fire and the only thing that comes out is the pure thing. Homelessness turned into that process for me, where I had no other alternative if I was going to live and survive as a person, literally, I mean, if I was going to live and survive into the future, I had to radically change everything that I knew about myself, because the reason I became suicidal, and I almost did it, you know, the reason I got there wasn't because of my past or what had happened to me in traumas. It was the aspect of looking at the future. I'm going to live this for the rest of my future. I didn't want to see the future.
So
And
something, and I just want to have you elaborate on something here, Wayne, because there's such a stigma in society, because we're talking about mental illness, mental health, but also you're now bringing up this idea of homelessness. And there's this stigma in society that when people are walking down the street, they see homeless people and they right away, they've chosen that lifestyle. They've done that to themselves. They've put themselves into that situation, which couldn't be any further from the truth. And here you are saying it was you looking at your own situation and the desperation, not to put words in your mouth, of that situation, and looking at that continued future of living in the woods in Portland, and thinking to yourself, this is no way for me to live. Could you just elaborate and discuss that a little bit more, so our listeners can hopefully in their own minds shatter this other myth of what homelessness is all about?
yeah, probably the beginning of that is the first realization is homelessness is more common than we realize. And we see them out there. I mean, everywhere you go. And like you said, I'm a semi truck driver, and there's very few places in the United States that I haven't been. And there's very few places I won't go here pretty soon. But we see the homeless people out there. And the biggest thing about it is kind of like the whole mental health stigmas. It's just such a mystery. It's just such a mystery. And we want to understand it, right? But in place of understanding it, then we can just put a label on it or a stereotype and just write it off and just move on. But I pretty much advocate for the homeless, and I'm still pretty active trying to find different ways. And I'm trying to reach the general public with a message that starts with the loved ones of the homeless and the relatives and friends of the homeless and the caretakers, the social workers, the mission directors. Those people influence the homeless people directly. You and I, usually it's a passing, we see them on the street and it's a passing, and we see them in that moment, and we just want to understand. But it's so bizarre, really, right, to most people's lifestyle. And most people, growing up, I never really, not only did I not think I would be homeless, I didn't care either way. I mean, I got to a point in my life where my own personal value kind of became the opposite of whatever society said that I should be. I got to a point where I was trying to do the opposite. I was in rebellion in a bad way. But this whole stigma about homelessness prior to COVID, homelessness was kind of them, those people. They're not one of us. It's them and us. And it's a social separation. It's like the extreme segregation of the classes. And now that COVID is here, part of what I'm trying to get people to realize is now we have no choice but to see them. And we have no choice but to see them in their suffrage and see them as real people. So one of the really social stigmas that I'm trying to smash with a rock, okay? I heard a talk one time not long ago, and it was somebody that was talking about stoicism and the stoic practice of philosophy. And there was a time, especially in Rome, where there was a certain kind of pride in community. Metropolis, actually, in Rome, metropolis didn't just mean metropolitan city, what we have today. In Portland, Oregon, there's 2 million people in the whole metropolitan area, but that's not what a metropolis is. A metropolis means we actually have pride in our community, to the point where, like, from the Stoic point of view, the limited understanding I have about the Stoic philosophy, you actually engage with people in your community. You sort of have an obligation to be a part of the community, not just by showing them or showing up, but actually being out there, sweeping the sidewalks and picking up the litter and helping to, actually thrive. Your community becomes a thriving community when more people are actively involved, right? So prior to COVID, we were able to just walk around the homeless and just kind of, they're over there and we're over here. Now that COVID is here, I mean, people are frightened kind of to go out in public and actually engage with the homeless. But we see them out there and we see them on the news, and we still don't know what to do, not only about homelessness, but how do you actually reach the homeless and what do you do? That's what everybody wants to know now. What do we do? What do we do?
So I have a question for you, Wayne, and we talked about this leading up to the interview. Mark and I both spent considerable amount of time living in New York City and walking the streets to and from work, and both of us being the compassionate, empathetic people that we are. We've engaged with homeless people. I'll never forget. I think one of the most moving experiences for me. I was on my way home one night from work on the West Side. A homeless person approached me and they were asking me for money, and I said, instead of money, I take you shopping. And I just remember the look on their face. And he and I walked into the supermarket. Mark will know, it was Fairway. And we walk into the supermarket and just up and down the aisles. And I said, whatever it is you need, feel free. I was doing my own shopping at the time, and he got what he needed. I got what I needed, and we parted ways. And so what I want to ask you is, you said so many people have this fear of the homeless. What is that fear? They're human beings, just like the three of us on this podcast. What is this fear and this stigma that's been created within society that we should be afraid of somebody who doesn't have a roof over their heads?
The way you phrase the question is actually a stigma or a stereotype. But, the truth is, you have to think in context, first of all. So you were in New York City walking around on sidewalks, and there's, I don't know how many million people in New York, but I've went down in there in my semi truck, and I have vowed to my company now and the company I was in before, I will never do it again in a semi truck. But okay, so a lot of us are very active and busy, and a lot of people aren't actually in the downtown areas where they actually see the homeless eye to eye. And so the only thing they know about homeless people are kind of what they see in the news or what they saw in a movie, or what they see on Facebook or in social media. So it gets to kind of the stigmas and trying to smash the stigmas about mental health issues. Kind of like if you tell me, okay, well, I know, Wayne, from experience, what you're describing to me is PTSD. It's as clear as day. You have PTSD. Well, I do. I've had PTSD, but that doesn't explain the experience or the emotional impact that actually happened to me. Like, what was PTSD to me compared to PTSD to somebody else? And so when we're actually trying to understand the homeless, and you said, why are we afraid of them? Kind of we're afraid of discovering that homelessness is as much a part of our society. It's a permanent pillar in our society. And when when I kind of said we're terrified to get out there now, it's because of COVID. Whether we have the vaccines or not, or whatever, it's getting in close proximity with them because of COVID.
So, Wayne, I hear you say that homelessness is a pillar of our society. It's something that's just always going to be there. And obviously, and I'm not pointing fingers. I'm not saying this to be political or, to point, a mind's eye society. But for someone who's been homeless, has interacted with the homeless a lot in a lot of different ways, why do you believe that there isn't necessarily a solution? Like, homelessness will always exist. Why do you believe that?
How honest do you want me to be, Mark?
I want you to be fully honest.
Brutally honest?
And if you're not, I'm going to ask a follow-up question.
All right. Brutally honest?
Yep.
I feel like David Goggins right now. Like, do you really want me to get into this shit with you right now?
Yes, I do.
Look, man, look. Okay, you and I and Eric, we're pretty proud of our accomplishments, but we want to succeed in society. And for me, I have 3 adult children and 6 grandchildren. So for me, not to accomplish something is not an option for me. Going down, in history as the vagabond that never amounted to anything. And the only thing that I left my children was a notebook full of scrap things that I wrote while I was homeless. Not good enough for me. Okay. In the book that I'm trying to come out with pretty soon, I don't really want to tell the title because then there's going to be like a whole bunch of books with my title. But I'm describing some of the fundamental things that I've discovered by living among the homeless. First of all, I started living among the homeless in Portland as an experiment. I went back to my apartment, but during the week, I would grow my whiskers out and put on my backpack. And on the weekend, I'd just go hang out with them. And they didn't know any different. They didn't care to ask. But to answer your question, dude, I've come across this. It's a theory that I'm working on, okay? And I'm not an expert in economics or anything like that. But as a blanket statement, okay, the more social services that we offer into the billions of dollars that we're rolling out, billions of dollars. But I mean, as of COVID, it's necessary. Prior to COVID, the more social services we roll out and the more easily accessible we make it for people based on the only criteria that they're homeless. What I say in my book is we're turning our free enterprise country into a welfare nation. I've met, befriended, lived with, eat with, slept with, camped with people that are homeless because it was so easy. In Portland, it was so easy to be homeless and just hang out and kick it on the streets. But through the years as a maintenance technician for apartments, I've spent 12, maybe 14 years as a career, different places, different cities, working in apartments. And I see behind the closed doors how people live behind closed doors. And I know people kind of intimately by, how long it takes them to take their trash out and how long they let the dishes pile up. And, they drive a Mercedes, but I wouldn't sleep in their home. You know what I mean? But the more social services we offer as across the board, if the only really qualifying factor is you're homeless, then you come in and get these services. We're actually creating a wave of people that are either limiting their availability at work so they qualify for social services, or they're walking away from their jobs. And the brutal, honest reason is, it's tough to make a living, dude. It's hard. Traditionally, like when I was with my former spouse, we had 2 children coming up. They were 4, 5, 6 years old. Both of us working 40 hours a week and me doing side hustles on the weekend. We still couldn't actually, like, we were driving not only a used car, we were driving a used car that we had to put a half a quart of oil in if we went more than 10 miles. You know what I mean? And that sort of thing is also more common than we realize. It's the more wages we make, then the higher debt to ratio that we're getting in. But across the board, the reason why I say homelessness, we're not going to actually end homelessness and solve it. We could, okay, if you want to live in a society that is completely 100% subsidized by the federal government, and it's not a free enterprise where entrepreneurs aren't allowed to be because the government's going to decide, who's the doctors, who's the taxi drivers. And I mean, that's George Orwell stuff, 1984, his book, 1984. But the more social services we make available because of the fact of being homeless, and I hope you'll give me a chance here in a few minutes to qualify what that means, but we have to sort out who should get it. And it's sort of like dealing with the big stigmas of the mental health issues. Who really has PTSD and who is just kind of like really pissed off because of, something happened. And that gets into a very long trajectory. Mental health can be diagnosed accurately over a period of time. But coming in for a 30-minute interview or answering a 100-question questionnaire, that's how it started with me. They're not accurately diagnosing our mental health. So then they start giving us medications based on that first diagnosis. And it turns out many times to be the wrong diagnosis. So a lot of times we allow homeless people to receive services that they're not necessarily entitled to, which cuts somebody else out. And we turn down people that are just, they're literally within starvation and their health is giving out. And if they don't get health soon, they're not going to make it. But to us walking by, they all kind of look the same, don't they? I mean, they all kind of look the same, and we don't know what to do for them one by one. And, Eric, what you did when you took that guy shopping or whatever, didn't you walk away and just feel like almost bulletproof for a couple hours? Like, man, I actually did that. Like, I reached out to a guy and I took him shopping, but you know what he's going to remember? He's not necessarily going to remember that you took him into the grocery store. He's going to remember this guy walked by and actually cared about me. Somebody cared and stopped and talked to me and actually tried to meet my needs. And you probably just bought that guy some time because he might have been right at the edge of giving up. Give up. Yeah.
It's a really interesting point, Wayne, and I do want to talk
that's
deeper,
where I'm at.
And I want to hear a little bit more of your sort of qualification of this idea of homelessness. And I'm going to answer from me for what you just said to Eric. And as someone who has reached out to people at different times, one of the hardest things and one of the pieces I've seen is seeing that I actually had someone look at me and literally be like, man, the $10 isn't that important. Thanks for seeing me. And what that did to me was it made me reflect on all the times that I didn't necessarily see someone, whether I was distracted, busy, whether it was the same homeless guy I've seen 100 times. And I'm like, I've seen people help him. Why isn't he changing? Right. And it is this interesting sort of dichotomy of you want to have social services. You want to help people, right? None of us are standing here being like, dude, get rid of it all. That'll fix it. But there is a sense of when there is someone else making the decision of who's sick and who isn't, and who deserves care and who doesn't, it's automatically fallible, right? There's going to be mistakes made.
100%.
100%. So, with this intersection of sort of like where mental health comes into play and things like that, I mean, I have to be honest, we live in Colorado where they legalized marijuana 8 years ago. And the homelessness population in Denver skyrocketed. And there's, it's anecdotal, but there is a certain amount of support to what you're talking about if you're going to make the statement of if it's an easier place to be, if fun drugs are readily available and legal, and you're not going to get arrested for camping literally on the grass of the Capitol building, you're sort of setting yourself up for that situation. So how do you sort of qualify that? And then after that, I would like to steer back and talk a little bit about your story, but I think this is too important not to hear your thoughts on.
All right. First of all, the marijuana thing, I find it kind of humorous now because first of all, I was a devoted pot smoker for 25 years of my life. Started when I was like in the summer of 9th grade, between 8th and 9th grade, somebody turned me on to that. But I mean, this was 1980s weed that was kind of shaking the bag with a few seeds. It's not the potent stuff right now that you would call maybe train wreck, but yeah, I mean, for real, like the potency now that they're coming out with hydroponic cloning and all the stuff that they're doing, they don't have to mix chemicals with it. They're just coming up with some very powerful, potent stuff. I started truck driving 4 years ago. So that would have been 2017, 18. And at that time, I think there was maybe 2 states in the country where you could actually see public advertising for the dispensaries, come to the dispensary. And now it's blanketing the country. I mean, I get a kick all the time. I call up my wife sometime and say, hey, I'm going to stop in at this dispensary over here, because they're just advertising it's free will. And they're getting so clever with how they put like the marijuana leaf and the 420 and the different things. They make it like clip art or graphic artistic stuff. But basically, if you have a medical marijuana card, which is your permit to go get it, then there's dispensaries where you go get it. No, we didn't have that in the 80s or even when I was homeless. But I think a part of the skyrocket thing is when they've legalized marijuana, not only as a medical use, because in Portland, Oregon, there was qualifying criteria for you to get a medical marijuana card. You didn't just come in and say, dude, I'm depressed. It was 1 year, it was 12 months of verifiable psychiatric counseling or some other means that just simply doesn't seem to, help your problem. But then what it turned into was anybody with a severe toothache or severe backache could actually claim medical marijuana for pain. And so I think the skyrocket in homelessness is when they've legalized it for recreation, the employer still has the right to be a drug-free employer. Okay. So that means it's just a matter of self-discipline now. And I can speak from experience because I'm drug-free, alcohol-free. I quit cigarettes and everything else like more than 10 years ago. It's been more than 10 years that I've had anything, even certain pills and medications. I think the closest medication that I get to real medications is like Advil. I take nothing for my depression, nothing for my bipolar. And, sometimes I probably should be on some kind of regimen. But anyway, when we have the freedom to choose, right, whether we're going to go all in on our responsibilities as adults to be drug-free, to keep our jobs, or we're just kind of get relaxed about our morals and the discipline that it takes to be drug-free. To be a drug-free company, they require people to do random drug screening. And, even in my company, my trucking company has like 800 or 1,000 truck drivers, and they've got like 6 terminals around the country. Just in the past, I've received a newsletter recently. They said just in the past 12 months, they've had such a spike in marijuana use among drivers. They've lost something like, 200 drivers in 12 months. So that's an employee turnover rate. You know what I mean?
And do you think that's an intersection of the legal access to it and the sort of mental health clusterfuck we're all going through in this pandemic? Do you think, it's really hard, right? We want to talk about certain things sort of in isolation. But the thing I think we've all sort of learned collectively as a society lately, especially in the mental health space, this shared trauma, finger quotes for those of you listening, not watching, I just made, has sort of exacerbated or at least ripped the Band-Aid off some of these things. And so do you think one of those is sort of more prevalent to it than the other, or do you think they're just inextricably linked and it's just that's the way the world is sort of right now?
I'm going to stick to the club where I don't think COVID has a lot to do with it.
Okay.
I'm personally, I just think it's just another choice that we have in America, especially. I had an idea to explain that and back it up, and I'm kind of trying to remember what that was. But I've heard many times, and I think you guys have heard the same thing, that in the United States, okay, we are like 5% of the whole world's population, 7 billion people. There's only like 500 million in the United States. But we consume something like 65 to 70% of all depression medications and even cocaine. Like, we are the heaviest consumption users of cocaine in the world. But we are one of the smallest populations in country. And I think marijuana is just kind of a table drug anymore. When I was a teenager, my mother and my grandmother was from the generation literally of the 60s where marijuana was this evil caper coming to steal your children. You know what I mean? Have you seen some of that graphic art they were using in the comic books and stuff back then?
Oh, yeah.
Real demons with angry eyes.
Yeah.
This was the marijuana,
The devil weed.
The devil weed, dude.
I've been very open that, I'm very much a recreational user of many different substances and luckily have not ended up in a bad place with it. But it is, I think part of it, and that's why I asked the question selfishly and unselfishly, is I do think it's an intersection, right? Like, access is access, but I do think what you sort of push on is the American lifestyle, although quite wealthy and with a lot of access to a lot of things, doesn't always necessarily lead to the most mentally or physically healthy lifestyle, right? We're fat, we're depressed, we're kind of a mess. And I say we, because I've been there and am there at times too. So So I want to kind of wrap this back around, Wayne. So here we are. Let's talk about it. We're fat, we're depressed, we're doing drugs, we're drinking too much. And then you're part of this homeless population. And we were kind of discussing this pre-call. You splatted rock bottom. We would like it to be a little bit of a softer landing. It's one of the things that Eric brought up, which I really appreciated the way he said that. But you splatted rock bottom, but you didn't stay there. What changed? What helped you change? I have a guess that a lot of it had to do with being a dad and a family man, and being a version of yourself you knew existed but wasn't there right now. But something had to have changed your mind. Where and how did that happen?
Oh boy. Well, I just heard one of your podcast episodes. I wrote it down here. It's episode 22 with Lois Wagner.
Lois
Wagner.
Yep.
Okay. Her story there was so kind of devastating. I was hoping that it had a happy ending. I mean, she was brutally raped and left for dead, right? But she came back with this forgiveness. This became all-consuming to her, that she worked through all of her mental anguish and all of her healing through the trauma of how she was raped and left for dead, basically. But it got down to the last thing that set her free was she wasn't able to actually forgive this guy. I mean, the Christians talk about this form of forgiveness, which means no strings attached, complete, total, all-in forgiveness. I'm not there for certain things, but she got there. And part of it was, dude, I had to forgive myself. Because one day, the striking realization came to me one day. I was walking by some of those mirrored office buildings that are made out of glass, I kind of feel sorry for the people that must have been in that office room, because this day I had a bipolar meltdown that came from my horns came out. But I was walking by and I'm looking at all these people around me, walking here and there, and they're kind of walking, they're going around me, even though I wasn't in their way. They were shooing around me. My whiskers was blown out, my hair was sticking out from underneath my hat, I had a backpack on, I had dirty clothes, because I was actually camping in the woods and I'd walked to town. I happened to see myself right up close, life size, in one of those chrome looking mirrored windows. And I just stopped and I looked at myself, and I had this terror come over me, because I finally saw myself for real. And I'm not imitating another podcast that I'm going to bring up that I listened to, yours, episode 29, Jeff Tieford.
Yeah, I was just like, there's Jeff Tieford seeing his fat old self in a mirror in a store.
Dude. Well, it's the same realization. He saw himself. He was walking in Target. He was walking in Target, and he has a back injury, so he kind of walks sideways or crooked a little bit, and he's in severe pain all the time, but he didn't realize what he looks like. He saw this guy walking towards him, and he was kind of trying not to stare. He was trying to be polite, The closer he got to this guy, he realized it was actually one of those full-length mirrors it was sitting somewhere at a weird angle, and he saw himself, and he goes, my God, that's me. He saw himself for real. He's seen himself in the bathroom every morning, but this time he saw into himself, through himself. And he went to the pharmacy and said, I'm not going to take my meds anymore. If I'm going to die, I'm not going to die because of this diabetes, type 2 diabetes. You guys are killing me with these pills. Well, word got back to his physician, and she got him in there. They had him under the wrong diagnosis. He wasn't type 2 diabetes. He was more with diabetes, but not type 2. It wasn't chronic.
He did
stuff.
type 1. He'd actually been diabetic his whole life, misdiagnosed.
Yeah.
And the thing that's interesting, and I want to ask you, Wayne, was it similar? Because, Jeff's first impression when he saw himself that he didn't realize was himself is he felt really bad. He's like, look at that poor fuck. He could barely walk and he's overweight. And God, how miserable must he be? And then I know Jeff really well. He's actually a good friend. And he told me this story, and he was like, I realized that poor fuck was me. And that had to change. So how did yours go? There you are. You see, for lack of a better term, I'm just going to say it, crazy Wayne in the mirror. What did you do?
Well, dude, Jeff came to the realization, he went home ready to die. He just, whether it was depression or whatever we want to call it, he was at the end of his story. And something came over him, like this conviction came over him. He said it wasn't because he would miss his kids or his wife or whatever. He just did. He said, I'm just not ready to be done. I'm not ready to be done. This isn't the end of my story. Okay. So what happened to me, actually, I was living among the homeless people. I was living as a homeless person, and I was actually stuck out there. I went out there partying at first, and I tried to get jobs. I'd quit, lose a job, get fired. Dude, this went on for 3 years. 3 years I was a chronic homeless person. And what chronic means, just so you know, it means longer durations of episodes of homelessness more frequently. It's frequent periods lasting longer durations. That's what chronic is. So what I saw in that building glass, I became the homeless person. The same damn homeless person that I was judging all of them guys, because I would hang out with them, and in my mind, I was going, I'm not really one of you. I can step out this anytime I want to. I'm not as bad as you are, because I know in my mind I'm a patriotic guy and I have morals and I believe in myself and I'm going to succeed. All I got to do is just kind of, decide. I'm just going to snap out of it. When I saw myself, I was like into my third year of trying to snap out of it. I was into my third year of trying to get out of the homeless situation I was in. And so what came over me, the reason I said I feel sorry for whoever must have been in that office room, I got so close to the mirror, I was yelling at myself, I was flipping myself off, I was shadow boxing, throwing punches in the air. I couldn't believe what I saw. Like, it wasn't just the whiskers and stuff, but later on I realized, like, I had this kind of obsessive hatred for shaving. And I mean, you see me now, I got some shaving going on, but I hated shaving, right? I just hated doing it. I hated it. But my hair's like, especially camping out there and sleeping on these things, anytime I would lay on a pillow, it would mash my hairs and make me itch so bad it was tormenting. Well, the reason I didn't shave, it wasn't because I hated shaving. It's because I couldn't stand looking at myself in the mirror, in the eyes. Like this close as I am to my screen, I had to see my eyes. And there was not the spark that I used to have in there. I wasn't the patriotic guy. I wasn't the father, the proud dad that I used to be. I wasn't the military man I used to be. I was this homeless man that was stuck in a chronic homeless situation. And with my best effort, I just couldn't get out of it.
So what you just brought up, Wayne, and I was listening and listening and listening, and it's such a key point for all of our audience. You're describing, in many ways, that stigma that we talked about earlier of, I'm using air quotes, the crazy homeless person. And so you were apologizing to the people in the office, right? They saw you, and if you're one, you can only imagine how many instances, as people are walking down the street or sitting in an office or in a coffee shop, and they're seeing the same thing play out. It is in many ways, and we're coming back to that word intersection, which I really love on this podcast. It's that intersection of, there was underlying mental illness in your life. And for you, the very thought of looking at yourself was so tormenting. That was you acting out. And so what other people see as, there's a crazy homeless person, it could be that person acting out with some other mental illness, some other shame or guilt that at that particular point in time is so unbelievably disturbing for them. But as a society, we don't even stop to think, could that potentially be the case? People will step to the other side of the sidewalk, drag their kids away. It's so powerful, that story that you just told, for everyone to stop and think for a minute.
But before they do, we're not going to leave them broken. Wayne,
no.
You got your shit together. What did you do?
All right. Well, I had to make a decision one morning. Where I was camping out in the woods, there was rats and raccoons and stuff that kept getting into my backpack and stuff that I would store in my tent. I'd come back and my plastic containers would be ripped open and my food was taken, So I found this rope laying by the road, and I threw it up over one of the high limbs in a tree. And at that time, I didn't think about hanging myself. I actually had a much more guaranteed sudden way to do it. But there was this high bridge the nickname of it was Suicide Bridge. It was like 120 feet up. And it was a bridge between two cliff faces that they carved in between this mountain for a highway. So this bridge went over the top of it, and it was 120 feet down. And that was one thing I was thinking. But when I saw this rope hanging there without my backpack on it, one morning I was sitting there, just kind of sitting there looking around, and I hated the idea of going to town. And I was seriously thinking about the bridge, right? I saw this rope and it was just kind of in the breeze. And I thought, man, that would just so work. It would be such a peaceful ending. It would suck for about 60 seconds, but that would end it. Here's to answer your question. My children didn't see me as, hanging out, kicking it with the homeless people. They were disgraced for people on Facebook to realize I'm their dad. When they would make the link, my Facebook and them, I was actually, back then, I think it was FaceTime. We had FaceTime. Or no, MySpace. It was MySpace.
MySpace.
We had MySpace, right? So I had a MySpace account. I was this homeless advocate. And the homeless advocate was kind of my disguise for walking around town being a homeless guy. I was homeless right here. That might help answer I was homeless right here. The whiskers and the shirt and the stuff didn't matter. Yeah. I could wash that off. I could do a makeover, but dude, I was homeless right here. And that's what I saw that day. When I saw myself, that's what I realized. Like, I've lost what I thought was my real morals and my real values as a patriotic, proud-ass guy, and I just knew that I was hooked into this homelessness because I could not function along with everyone else. It's a competitive game out there just to keep a job, man. But, now that we have COVID, I mean, it's a game changer, right? But the problem that we're going to have, especially now, it's turning winter. And so these people are into some really, really bad situations because there is no, most cities and towns, the homeless shelters are closed. It's either because the state employees are not allowed to show up because of the COVID, or, if you really get into understanding how these mission shelters operate, it's done kind of on a skeleton crew of hired salaried employees, and it's done with massive volunteers. The volunteers are the workforce of the homeless missions, the soup kitchens, and a lot of the places where the homeless have to get their services. Volunteers aren't there no more. So these places can't operate. But I think I'm getting off track on your thing here, man.
No, you're not. And we are sort of getting towards the end to wrap up. So one of the things that I want to sort of focus on, it's called From Survivor to Thriver for a reason. And right. I have to give you a huge amount of credit, Wayne, and this isn't a complaint. You have been more than candid coming out with the worst part of your story. But it's kind of like my joke, and it's why Eric laughs so much. I don't like to leave people broken, especially if I know they managed to put themselves back together a bit. So I want to hear a little bit about that process of you sorting that out. And not only the realization, right? We've talked a lot about the realization of you being like, all right, I'm homeless in here. And for those people who aren't watching, who are listening at home, Wayne pointed right to the temple, into his brain. But then how were you able to break through and say, I've made choices or done things that have put me in this place, but this isn't what I want to be. This isn't who I am. And how did you kind of overcome that?
All right. One thing that I heard in that episode 22 with Lewis Wagner, I don't remember her words, but I'll never forget her message. Her heartfelt message was, as long as you live as a victim, you will not experience your personal freedom. You won't taste freedom. As long as you're a victim in some way, it could be a small way or a huge consuming, all consuming mental health problem. As long as you see yourself or identify as the victim, You will not really walk away and become, I call it going into the center, because I've started learning a lot more about who we are as a person, as a human being, and how our emotions and our physical well-being and our mental health well-being all have to work in harmony. You could eat the right foods, you could be healthy, you could work out and everything else, but you could have some really, terrible things going on in your head, and your health is ruined, and you could be the most happy guy in the world, but if the only thing you eat is just junk food and soda pop, and you sit in an office 8 hours a day and you don't physically move, then your body's ruined. I came to the realization that my children, who were teenagers at the time, were so humiliated by me being their father. And eventually they were going to start having children of their own. And since I had children and they hadn't yet, my idea was as soon as one of them gets pregnant the first time, they're going to have a different viewpoint of me as a person, because now they understand parenting. But it backfired on me, guys. It's when they started having children, they came down on me with a different kind of judgment. Their judgment was, you didn't have a right to walk away. You didn't have a right to become homeless in the first place. You didn't have a right to give up any of your responsibilities. You're a father. How could you? And I mean, they were saying it with like anger in their eyes. How could you, right? This realization was, I inflicted something on them that was unintentional. I didn't mean to hurt them. I gave up on myself, okay? But in giving up on myself, they realized how I gave up on them. And the turnaround for me was, it was exactly what Jeff Tford said in episode 29. I got it written down because I'm going to go back and revisit that again. He didn't kind of use my words, but he said, I'm not ready to be done yet. And I looked at that rope hanging up there, and I finally cut it down, and I cut it into little pieces so nobody else could ever use that rope. And what I decided was, my story's not over. I'm not done yet. My story's not over. And I wanted to win them respect back. I didn't want to win them back because they were established with their stepdad now, but I wanted to win back their respect and admiration as a person. And the only way that I knew that was possible was for me to become a respectable person. And I had to shift my paradigm, which was a new word I had to learn. You guys and some of us, we use it now as everyday language. Oh, my paradigm. Back then, I'd never heard of that. I didn't know what a paradigm was. But I had to shift the way I saw myself in society. And I had to see myself being willing, hear me guys, fathers and everybody else, I had to be willing to step up my game and get back in the game, kind of get back in the arena and fight for it. Because in the end, I didn't have skills, I didn't have education, I didn't have a degree, I didn't have anything going for me. And the only thing I really wanted to achieve was be remembered by my children as a respectable person. And that right there, you might as well told me I need to learn Chinese language and be able to speak it fluently. That's how much work I had to put into just learning what respectable meant to a child watching their father as a homeless man.
Wayne, it's amazing, and thank you. And I'm so glad you cut that rope into so many little pieces, because and for being here with us today, because there, for people who don't struggle with mental health issues and mental illness, and you spoke very well to this, right? You see a homeless person, you see someone struggling, and it's like, oh, you just have to get better. You should try this or do this. The crazy part, though, is essentially you had to have that discussion yourself. And I think this is the piece that people lose from the outside, whether it's dealing with somebody who's an addict or is struggling with, very debilitating mental health issues, is there is a decision point, but you can't tell someone, oh, you need to get your shit together. The person has to make that decision themselves. And then they can break down barriers that will blow other humans away. And Wayne, that's where your story is so important for people to hear, because somewhere, hopefully, we're reaching a man out there who is ready to give up and doesn't think he can be a respectable person or someone his kids can be proud of for overcoming, right? And And that's what we need to change. That's if there's a stigma, I mean, there's so many of them, right? But it's that stigma of like, oh, that person, they could just get over it. And it's like, no, they need to know they can get over it. They need to make the decision to make those choices and push through it. And it's not always possible, right? Like that, there are things that are impossible to overcome. I'm not saying, because I have often been accused of being a little bit too much of a Teddy Roosevelt, pick yourself up by the bootstraps and sort it out kind of person. But there is a part of it that is that.
That's where we're at, though. That's when I was saying earlier, like, how brutally honest do you want me to be with your listeners? I'm trying to. I always love to try to end on a positive, on a talk like this, because if we walk away in that headspace, you're just going to rattle in that headspace. And I'm telling you, there is no answers. One thing is very upfront and honest. What I finally realized, and it's what I'm trying to capture in my book, you know how difficult it is to write your feelings in a book?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, dude, I'm triggering myself lately with some of the darkest moments of my past. I've had to revisit those memories. And just like an actor, I've had to step back into that space in order to write about it. And writers know what I mean. Writers know what I mean. I see some guitars in your background there, Mark. Are you singing? Are you playing some music? You can't just walk in the room. You can't just walk in the room, pick up the guitar and make it sing, right? You have to get in that space.
You have to get in that space. And, you talk about being an actor and reliving. It's actually, I think, so often why artists, there's this idea of the tortured artist. It's unfortunate, and it doesn't have to be that way. But too often, as an artist, whether it's a singer, a musician, a writer, an actor, you have to get into that space of the raw and of the worst parts. I'm actually kind of tearing up even thinking about it, because that's the human condition, right? And we spend a lot of time trying to get away from that and avoiding it. But the fact of the matter is, it's there, and the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And for someone who suffers with bipolar, that's the worst, because it could be a self-fulfilling sort of prophecy of you get in that mode, and then I'm sure you're probably scared to even get caught there.
Well, when you said that, one of you guys said that it was you. You said you've interacted with some homeless people, and the thing that touched you deeply, and you're still pondering it to this day, was he said, you actually saw me.
Yeah.
You stopped and you saw me, right? So what I'm trying to say, it kind of answers the question about, how to smash the stigmas and why are people afraid of the homeless? It's because they don't have the opportunity to actually see their own society from the eyes of a homeless person. I'm not a musician, but if you put a guitar in my hand, I guarantee you ain't gonna like what I sing, man. I don't even know if it's a G or a C, you know what I mean? But you pick it up and it's just your nature. It's your craft, right? But you've spent decades probably just tinkering with it.
Yeah.
Most of us have a moment. Yeah, well, most of us have a momentary glimpse into the homeless world, and it's usually as we're passing by.
Yeah.
But if I could leave them with something, the most incredible look on someone's face is when they've realized you took the chance to actually just stop and listen to them. But you know what? There's so many freaking hustlers out there, and there's so many pretenders, and there's so many role players. Most of them people that have a cardboard sign that says hungry and cold, they're not hungry and cold. They're just using a cardboard sign, and they're just kind of copying what they've seen on the street. But where you find the real ones are the ones that are just, they got a glow of smile on their face. They're homeless. They're dirty. They kind of look ugly, but they're smiling. And when they talk to you, they actually mean what they say when they say, I hope you have a nice day, sir. They're not saying it sarcastic because you didn't give them $1. They actually care that you have a nice day. If you can follow that homeless person right there, you're going to get in touch with something that we miss out on at work and in our own space, and in our, we're so safe right now. You could spit on the camera, you ain't going to get me wet. You know what I mean?
Hell
if
yeah,
you
brother,
come-
I get it.
Yeah. If you come hang out with me in my home, you're going to be looking around to see if I've got really some sanitizing going on, you know? But we can't get into the mind of a homeless person just by passing by or watching them on
No.
TV, right? And so my biggest mental health turnaround was, okay, the Lewis Wagner message of forgiveness. I was able to come to myself as the felon convict that I was, jailed and locked into my own world, where I gave up on myself being able to be a part of society in that way. I gave up on myself, and I had to confront myself in that forgiveness spirit, like she talked about. She actually confronted the one that raped her, confronted him and said, it doesn't matter to me whether you get out or whether you spend, more time in here. They don't need to call me and let me know you're being released. I'm telling you, I'm leaving here because I'm taking my power back. When I cut down the rope, that's what I did. And it wasn't within 2 weeks. Within 2 weeks, dude, I was working again, had a construction job, and I just went on from there. The following spring, I got a maintenance technician job, which was my first real apartment. But I took it so seriously that I realized I have an actual obligation to just make myself work through my shit in order to make it in society. And it was hard. I did it because it was hard. It wasn't easy. I did it because it wasn't easy.
It's
My
never
children,
easy.
It's not easy. And I took the challenge because it was hard, in a way that I fought back to reclaim what I felt was taken from me by life, by God, by the universe, by my mother, whoever you want to name. But when you confront yourself and say, you know what? If I'm going to die for this, I'm going to go out fighting. And for some reason, I ended up fighting my way. Well, later, I met a woman that loved me. And dude, I didn't think that she didn't love me at first. We had to grow together and learn together, because the woman I met had a teenage son, 13 years old, that was violently angry and depressed and confused, but he didn't know why. He couldn't explain to his mother why. He couldn't explain to the school counselor why. He got kicked out of school several times. He got arrested a few times. Now he's a pretty grounded young man. But the two of us, do you know what happens when you get two bipolars in the same room that disagree with each other?
I can only imagine.
My wife has been the lady in between her husband and her son.
Yeah.
And it was always understood, and you can leave on this, but I never had to tell my wife it's me or him, because I knew without asking it wasn't going to be me. She's a mother. She's a mother, by God. But her strength and character, we don't give women the credit that they deserve sometimes. We're always talking about men need to learn how to feel and express your feelings because we're just trying to conform to social stigmas about our own emotions, right? This woman had no choice but to be strong and go cry privately. And when I caught her doing that, that became the very instrument that actually sharpened me. And you talk about confronting yourself inwardly. That was more instantaneous than all of the years of reading books and, going to counseling. The woman I loved before we were married, I was in love with her. And I decided I was going to get this lady, right? Dude, I came to visit her one weekend, and she had a note and a $20 bill laying on her bed. The doors was open. I was welcome to come in, but it was a note saying, your negative attitude, your pessimism, and your negativity is so contagious. I can't handle you being in my home. Please take your things. This $20 is so you can't use the excuse that you need to be here because you don't have gas money. Guys, she sent me back to my freaking mother's house, who lived 45 minutes away. And that was my next. I sat out in the woods throwing rocks in the river. I don't need this chick. I don't need this girl. And you know what was going on in my head? She was absolutely right.
Absolutely. And Wayne, you'll be happy to know that we share this. Eric and I are very open that we definitely have better halves, and they've made us better people. So you're not alone there, brother.
Yep.
Well,
But
I just,
the sad realization was me is, I wasn't trying as hard as I thought I was. And I guess I got out of being homeless, and I got I had an apartment, I had my own pickup truck, and I had a job. So compared to the homeless guy I used to be, I was a high achiever, man. I'm a high roller, but I was still right here. I was still bipolar right here. I was still borderline right here. And just so you guys know, like I'm not an expert on bipolar and borderline, but the number one problem with being a borderline, having the borderline thought process as we filter things in the world, is called codependent. And being codependent doesn't mean like, I need your friendship, I want your friendship. It means I wither and become ill and become really psychopathic ill in the mind if I don't get your acceptance. If you don't answer my text messages, your phone could be dead. You might be in a no-cell area. You might have it turned off. That ain't good enough for me. I'm a codependent. Like, you must answer me.
yeah.
And I'm going to start getting obsessive about getting that back. And if you don't answer me, then I just lose it mentally. So that's what I had to work with. Her breaking my codependency was her love, unconditional love, but it came from a brutal strength. Like, it was more like Clint Eastwood saying, you know what? You need to get your horse and get your shit out of here.
Well,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Wayne, but she did, because she taught you that dependence isn't the love. The love is the
Yeah.
truth and the support, and that, I mean, and you were talking about leaving somebody, like leaving our listeners and watchers with something positive. I can't think of a more positive message than that. Is, if there's someone out there who's telling you that they think you could be a better version of yourself, they probably love you, and you should probably listen to them.
Well, we do that well-intending thing when we walk by the homeless. This might help answer another part of, what do we do and how do we do it?
Yeah.
It's not just one thing that's going to help that guy get up off the bench and walk in somewhere and get treatment or whatever it is he needs. It's all of the voices on a daily basis that's going to force him down into that rabbit hole where he has to make the decision. Am I done? Or is this not the end of my story? So we help push them there, but don't beat yourselves up just because you don't understand it and you don't know what to do. Dude, it's so complex. I mean, how do you fix PTSD? You know what I mean? It's different for everybody. It's different for everybody.
Well, Wayne, I think it's a message that Eric and I, have sort of realized as we've gotten deeper and deeper into these podcasts. And, the first step is not to listen, it's to hear, and see a person for who they are and do the best you can to be there. And I'm glad you found a place where you could have forgiveness for yourself and start there, and then grow on from there. And Wayne, I can't thank you enough for sharing your story. It's been wonderful to get to know you. I look forward to the book, but no pressure. I don't want to add additional stress. When you get there, you'll get there. But
dude, my book grows with me as I grow. 5 years ago, I thought I was done with the book. And then I started realizing I wasn't quite at the bottom layer. But Eric, before we leave.
Yes.
Wasn't it you on one of the episodes I mentioned, you said you're sitting back as the third party listener, and you kind of realize like doing these podcasts is more like a group therapy session. Every time you guys get somebody on here, we're all like coming to these major things, and then we shut off the camera and we go talk to our wives and say, God, you should hear what I just figured out.
Well, yeah, that was me. And actually, as Mark was not kidding when he said we are married to two amazing, powerful women who make us much better versions of ourselves.
Yeah.
Every time I get off one of these podcasts, she can see the wheels spinning. And the first question she asks is, what'd you learn? Which to me blows me away. It's not what did you talk about, or it's what did you learn? And to your point, Wayne, a big part of why Mark and I are doing this is so that we can get the message out to as many people as possible, because it's really become the voice of the From Survivor to Thriver movement. But also so much of the podcast and the conversations and the discussions and getting to meet everyone that we've had on, it's about learning about one another. And to come back to something you said earlier, that idea of having pride in community, it's creating a community around people who have shared traumas, shared experiences, so that we can all share that with other people to remind them that they're not alone. It's perfectly okay to not always be okay, as I like to say. And changing, I've had more and more time over the past few months to think about what it is we're all doing collectively by speaking up and speaking out. And it's really shattering all of these stigmas one conversation at a time. I can't thank you, Wayne, enough for spending your evening tonight with us, having this. And if I could just say one thing to our listeners and watchers is, if you take away just one thing from today, it's this whole idea of what Wayne said about I have to forgive myself. And we're always our own harshest critics. You don't have to be homeless. You don't have to have experienced the worst trauma or some of the mental health issues that we all have, but be kind to yourself and give yourself permission to forgive yourself. So Wayne, thank you. Your journey, I know, will continue. I look forward to speaking with you in the months and years to come.
Just as a parting message for the loved ones of the homeless and everybody, like I mentioned, because the homeless people aren't sitting around watching your podcast, dude. Okay,
no,
but their loved ones are. We are.
Yeah.
My parting message, because of COVID, we're still out here. You and I and us and what we're doing right now. There's tens of millions of people that are peeking out of the curtains, just waiting for the green light to get back out there and start, cleaning up after COVID. But those homeless people are waiting out there, and they think that we're just in here playing on our iPods and stuff because we forgot about them. But my message goes out. I know from the inside scoop, there's millions of people ready and gearing up. There's people that are putting together food boxes and backpacks, and there's little 5-year-old kids that are coloring pictures and stuff that they want to give the homeless, because the homeless have been kind of featured now in a lot of news media because they're out there and we have no choice but to see them. So we're coming, we're on the way. We just don't know how long it's going to take to get there.
I think that's a wonderful message, Wayne. And, we often talk about the people around, and we call it our chosen family, and that group of family and friends. And that's a great reminder and message to anyone to know that, there can be help on the way always. And I can't think of a better way to leave us. So Wayne Shipman, thank you so much for joining us. Eric DeRosa, my partner, thank you as always. This is From Survivor to Thriver, episode 40. And I will leave us with these words, which I always do. Let's all please be as well as we can.